Network Automation Nerds podcast. Hello and welcome to Network Automation Nerds podcast, a podcast about network automation, network engineering, Python, and other interesting technology topics. I'm your host, Eric Cho. Today on the show, we'll be talking to Jeremy Schulman, aka Network Automaniac. Jeremy is the principal software engineer at Major League Baseball. He's also a prolific content creator, ranging from YouTube content, Twitter, blogs, and many other different channels. The topics that Jeremy talks about ranges from NetBox, AsyncIO, Python, network visibility, and a range of other network automation topics. I'm excited to welcome Jeremy to the show, so I hope you enjoy. Hi, Jeremy. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you've been very prolific. I've been following your work. I've seen your network field day, I guess recap and all the blog posts and Twitter posts that you've been posting. So it's good to have you on the show finally. I feel like I've known you, but this is actually the first time we met.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while. So thank you.
No, so in fact, we've been planning it for a while, but because, I mean, we'll get into it later in the show, but you currently work for MLB. So your season kind of follows that sports season. A lot of times you get busy for work just because of the playoffs.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the rhythm of our business is pretty interesting. I get busy in the off season because that's when we're actually doing project work. So we were really focused getting ready for the season. And then once we started baseball, at the end of March, then we're in a kind of more operations mode. And so now I've got got a little breathing space. So I'm really glad we're doing this.
That's very interesting. It's almost having how in quarter ends, typical enterprise have a freeze period, but your freeze period is a lot longer.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. Yeah, we generally think of while the game of baseball is being played, while we're in season, we don't really do major projects. I mean, sometimes we do some, but by and large, we're really in a more operational mode.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of an interesting workflow pattern or rhythm of business, as I like to call it. But it's really unique and very exciting because the game of baseball and the technology involved is really incredible. Working at MLB is like working at a high-tech company. We work with really cutting edge kinds of software and hardware, and just seeing how that interconnects to the network and how the network affects or becomes the backbone of everything we do is really quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a dream of mine too. I think it's the dream for a lot of people to combine your interests as well as your profession. I remember, I mean, I'm a casual fan for MLB. I remember Chen Yang when he was around, that was the period when I watched the most MLB games. But other than that, I'm a big fan of NBA. And it's like if NBA come calling, I might seriously consider relocating to New York or Ecuador just to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, so we don't have a team, which is, unfortunate. But I have the opportunity to watch as much baseball as I want. It's pretty cool. So it's great.
Yeah, so baseball games are a little longer, right? Like they're usually 3.5 hours or something like that.
Yeah. There is. It's a thing, But if you're at a sports bar, that's great.
Right. You get that excuse and say, oh, my bad. I got to do work. And that's tough luck. You got to watch the baseball game for work.
Yeah. Have to.
Yeah. So, Jeremy, actually, we're here not to talk about baseball, even though we could probably go on for a little while longer. But I'm a fan of your work. You've been blogging and posting very, I think you're very in touch with the current technology, whether it's AsyncIO, whether it's Python, also NetBox. And I know you recently attended, tech field day or networking field day. And so you're very in touch with those. But before we get into all that, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what do you do right now?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in the networking, field mostly my entire career, which is quite long. The hair color is real because otherwise it would be gray. So I started out actually when graduating out of college, I was a software engineer. I came out with a computer science degree. And for a little over 10 years, I wrote, embedded real-time software for, datacom and telecom equipment. So I built protocols, and
Got it.
forwarding plane microcode for ASIC chips. I mean, like really hardcore, software engineer.
Yeah.
And that was really exciting. And then just by happenstance, I made a transition from doing that to being in the field as a sales engineer, solutions architect. And so then I spent like the next 10 years of my career, on the field facing side to understand the business. So, but all along I've kind of kept my programming chops or, automation interests, kind of up. But then recently, well, I'll fast forward, into like 2012, I was at Juniper Networks, and I ran into, or I was assisting sales teams to like apply automation technologies in a complex sale, and this is before DevOps was a word.
Right.
This is technologies like Puppet and Chef being used by the system administrators. And so
Exactly.
we ran into a situation. Yeah, we ran into a situation where a really, really big potential customer said, more or less, we need Puppet to run on a switch for it to be useful in this project. And I was
Like a Puppet agent.
yeah, like Puppet. And I'm like, what is Puppet? Like literally, I had no idea what it was. And so it turned out that there was another gentleman at Juniper Networks who knew Puppet. Like he was part of our IT team. And so we collaborated on this, and I eventually wrote the Puppet agent, in Ruby, ported onto Junos. And that was like an epic saga.
Kidding.
Yeah, it was. That was an epic saga unto itself, which I digress. but two things happened from that. One is I had this epiphany. This is back in 2012 that network is going to go through the same shift that system admin went from system admin to DevOps, which was a 10-year journey for them. Is going to happen for networking, and some of the thought leaders of the DevOps world, seeing what I was doing, approached me and said, "Hey, this is going to be awesome for networking because we did this, and here's what your future is going to look like." So I actually was given a crystal ball for like 5-10 years out, and they said, "This is what's going to happen to the networking industry." And by and large, most of that was very true. What they told me was going to happen, and is still happening today. So that's kind of how I got into automation in the networking space, and I've been doing that. I mean, that was 2012, so we're now talking a decade. Right. Yeah. I've been doing this exclusively for a decade. Yeah. And so now, just to finish the story to answer your question. So now I'm work at Major League Baseball as a principal software engineer, but my entire focus is essentially, I like to think of it as infrastructure systems integration. We focus on the network. Yeah. But we actually do work that integrates with other aspects of other infrastructure teams, like ballpark infrastructure and corp infrastructure. So that's where I am today.
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I had cut your thought off, but I'm just wondering, because you mentioned back in 2012 and you saw, like the crystal ball from the system engineering kind of transferable knowledge into network engineering. Did the timing or did the timeline of this transition surprise you? Because we're still in it, right? And supposedly we should have learned a lot from software development and system engineering.
Yeah. It's am I surprised? I'm not surprised. I mean, when I spoke with the DevOps, leadership, the thought leaders in DevOps, they basically said, where they were at that time was 10 years from, where they started. So, it really took a long transition. And the biggest part of that hump was a people, process, culture kind of, phase of, do we want to change the way we're doing business? Think about it. For them, it was sort of like they were, hands-on, artisanally handcrafting bash scripts to, turn up servers and data centers like that. That's their world. Right. It took a really long time for people to even adopt technologies like Puppet and Chef and Ansible and Salt Stack was those are the 4 primary configuration management tools. So, but networking offers a more complicated problem, right? So you're like, if you look at those tools that I just mentioned, they solve a very, in the broader sense, a very simple problem. It's like, how do I, mass deploy a bunch of servers running MySQL and Nginx and, stamp that out just so they can get ready for the application people to run their apps on those boxes. Whereas in networking is both of those problems combined. Networking is a distributed systems problem where the configuration that network engineers put on the boxes are in fact the application side of that story. So the type of technology that we need in networking is actually orders of more magnitude complicated than just trying to use Puppet and Chef and Ansible. I mean, they were a good starting point, and I was successful in doing some things with those tools. But to try to solve the really big problems, those tools were just a very small aspect of the broader network automation, problems that we face. So am I surprised that it's taking us this long to be where we're at? Absolutely not. I mean, but we made a ton of progress. I mean, honestly, within the last 5 years, we've made an exceptional leaps and bounds, which I have to really give props to Cisco for their investment in DevNet, which I think really pushed the ball forward, in accelerating the broader adoption and interest in network automation. So you'll ask me simple questions and I'll give you these very grandpa stories.
Please do, man.
This is how this will go.
I enjoy it. No, so for people who are maybe younger or maybe people who just get into the industry, they may not realize what you like. Back to what you were talking about in your background, these were very distinct career tracks, right? Like it's almost, when you're doing embedded systems, that's hard. Like people stay the whole career in that track. Or, you jump into the kind of a system engineering, sales engineer side, that's a whole entire track. Then you come into, kind of DevOps and network engineering. So I think the stories that you talked about and the opinions you form is from these 3 different distinguished fields where people spend the whole entire career on. So I really enjoy that, kind of holistic view of that.
Yeah. I mean, I have had kind of 3 major shifts in my career, like just as you described. I mean, those are almost decade long each. So when I talk to the next generation of network engineers, and they're like, how do I get to be where you're at? And I'm like,
how much time do you have?
Yeah, I mean, you make choices and you make investments with your time, and you can get there, but it's not going to be an overnight kind of experience. I mean, right.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because and it's not a knock on intelligence or their dedication for work. It just simply takes that long. You can't have a baby in 1 month by giving it to giving a task with 9 different women, right? Like just simply sequentially, that's just how long it takes, even if you're smart and dedicated, to just be good. And then you're willing to kind of put the carpet underneath and go for that. Because
yeah. I mean, I actually gave a talk at NINOG, I can't remember when, maybe in 2014, on this exact topic. It was like, how much Python is enough for a network engineer? And I talked about the difference between being, competent.
Yeah.
There's like these very well-defined stages of knowledge acquisition. They talk about being novice and competent and proficient and expert and master. Like this was a paper out of like Berkeley from like the 70s or something. It's crazy. I found this really cool paper on this topic. But yeah, I mean, to become proficient in something, right? Which is what I would consider like a senior network engineer or a senior software engineer, is like a 5-year journey. Like that's just to become proficient. Like you can be competent in something in like a year or 2,
sure.
But yeah, it's an investment of time and energy and dedication to become really proficient at something. And then to get to the next level of, well, you're an expert. I mean, is again another 5 to 10 years, kind of. It's really a challenge because, and I'll answer this. This is another thing that I kind of harp on, is that there's a misexpectation by the networking industry about quote unquote automate the network. And by and large, I'm going to put this at the feet of vendors for creating a set of really poor expectations. It's like, oh, if you just do X, then you get Y. And I'm like, no. It's like, oh, if you attend this 2-week class on network automation, then you'll be able to automate your network. No. I mean, you'll get started.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So, I mean, I could rant about that for hours, so I won't.
No, but you're right? Like if you want uh just to write code, I mean, you could print hello world and congratulations, you get started. You're in the beginning of that step, but the journey is 1,000 steps, and where you're at really depends on your path and your progression, your ambition. So people talk about that T-shape expertise or proficiency, right? Like you get really deep in one thing and uh kind of broad on all the other technology topics. So for you, it's almost like an M shape, right? Like your software development, DevOps, and then sales side, which is not easy in itself. I mean, some people think of sales and marketing as just flows, which I disagree, right? Like I tried to transition into biz dev and I did it for a year. I was miserable. I wasn't very good at it. So like the whole discipline is not fluff. It's actually very, very much required for the business to run.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, I actually wanted to go into technical business development. Like that was like I wanted to do that as kind of a career choice for a while,
Yeah.
because I kind of had a couple of experiences where I thought that would be really interesting. Um, and it's not for everybody. I mean, and I really learned a lot, when I did that. I did that kind of that job for a few years.
Mhm.
And I learned an immense amount of about complex sales and deal flow and, business value mapping, like, because you have to learn those techniques and those skills. And I think that's really, really, that became very insightful to me now as I'm looking at projects like, okay, well, what should we automate? Well, how do we figure out what is valuable to the business? Because you get into these conversations where a vendor will say, "Oh, do network automation because it improves your business."
Right.
Well, there's a lot of A to B to C there, and step B is like, well, how do you do that?
Right.
And that in itself is a skill set. Like the DevOps people will talk about value stream mapping as a thing that's a technique that they use to figure that out.
Yeah.
That in itself is a skill. Like it's really hard, to try to answer a lot of those questions. People will kind of sum up that experience as, how do I get started? What should I do first? Right. And
Right.
they're asking that question because they're trying to figure out that answer. Like what's important to the business, or what's important to me as an individual in the business. These are real hard questions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are entire companies that publicly traded companies who just focus on that value proposition and mapping value to mapping value to your spend, right? Like we're measuring the effectiveness of your spend. The company that came into mind was Aptio, which is not too far from where I live, where they went private afterwards, but they were 10 years span, and all they do, well, not all they do, the majority of what they do is to map your IT spend into how effective was it, how it impacts business, and it's a thriving business, and it is a skill in itself. And to explain your value proposition upwards or to laterally to your peers as well.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of network engineers, can kind of get into automation programming and start building skills by not trying to bite that elephant off.
Yeah.
They shouldn't try to like, how am I going to solve these end-to-end complex workflow integrations, which they typically, are asked to by their leadership, because that's where the real business value is. But it's completely outside the scope of somebody who's just getting started. And I'll give you a great example of this.
Yeah, please
You
do.
know, uh, you know, let's say that you don't have a commercial product that does software upgrades to your network devices.
Right.
And so, and that's a problem. Like, like upgrading, keeping your software upgraded, on your network devices is a thing that you have to do, whether it's for security reasons or you need to get features or whatnot. And so somebody might say, well, that's a great idea for network automation. Like we should automate that problem away because it's complicated and it's error prone and there's a lot of steps in it. And so as you say those words out loud, then you should realize that maybe that isn't the first place you should get started. Like that's really hard to do. And there's
Yeah.
lots of steps. And then if you're not a software engineer mindset kind of person that can like create a flow chart that maps out every single opportunity for failure and then programmatically account for it, which is really hard,
Yeah.
you know, you shouldn't be doing that as project number one. Like that shouldn't be a thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
but leadership might think, well, that's a real big business problem that we should really try to solve. And that would
Right.
be, so you have that kind of disparity between, what a business really does value, and that is a true thing, versus the skill set and capabilities of somebody who's just getting started. And I think what happens when that situation occurs is that those missed expectations create, friction in somebody's, emotional state.
Yeah.
Like they feel stressed out, and they feel like they have to do something. And a lot of people don't kind of push back enough, saying, hey man, maybe that's a project too big for me right now, because they don't want to say no.
Yeah.
But when you're in the automation programming land, saying no is really important. It's a really important skill you got to learn how to do. It's like, I mean, honestly, I have an infinite opportunity set at MLB in my job. Like, there's so much I could be doing. Like, it's infinite.
Yeah.
Like, and if I had a team of like 5 or 6 people, I could really take a notch out of all the things. But it's like that. I mean, once you start really exploring the space of automation, what you could do, you start to see the world in a way of, wow, there's so much more I could be doing. And it becomes overwhelming. And then when people start seeing what you're capable of doing, they'll keep asking you to do more. So learning how to say no is kind of an important skill.
Yeah, learning how to say no gracefully. So
Yeah. Yes.
you don't
Yes.
piss
Yes.
off people, and you explain it nicely to say, I'm saying no, not because I hate you, but because I want this to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was at NFD, Tom basically we had this conversation. He's like, no is a complete sentence. And I'm like, I agree with you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so we mentioned MLB, and since that's what you've been doing for the last decade, almost. So that's let's talk about that a little bit, because for me, like I said, as somebody who been following NBA for I don't know, since 6th grade, so it's almost like a dream job to just combine your passion and what you do. Is that how you got started? Like, is that what you're feeling? Is that why you took the job, or was it because of the challenges they presented you? Technically, that was intriguing.
A couple of things. I am not a MLB. I'm not a baseball fanatic. I mean, I'm like I like going to a baseball game for the reasons of hanging out with my buddies and
Oh, nice.
enjoying a nice day. And I'll root for the Chicago Cubs because I'm from Chicago originally.
Right.
But I'm not like somebody who can rattle off stats or that kind of thing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've learned to really appreciate the game and enjoy the game more so since I've been here. I mean, I
Yeah.
find myself watching more baseball and
For
really
work.
paying attention. Yeah, for work.
Yeah, air quotes for work.
For work. Yeah, that's great. So that's been great. I mean, MLB. What was great about the opportunity at MLB was the leadership at MLB wanted the network operational excellence, is how I say it. They wanted the operational excellence of the network to match what was happening in the cloud engineering, the systems engineering, and the application engineering teams that they had. So again, MLB has very sophisticated high-tech organizations.
Yeah.
And as you might imagine, the network was kind of in the Stone Ages. So the goal was to go from caveman to spaceman is how I like to talk about that journey. And I think every organization is probably somewhere on that spectrum of caveman to spaceman. And even along that vector, there's like, well, maybe your configuration management is somewhere along that journey, and maybe your monitoring solution is somewhere along that journey, and maybe your integration technology is somewhere along. So there's many vectors. So it was almost a greenfield opportunity when it comes to what could we do. Like, I wasn't walking into, say, a really big organization that had technical debt of network automation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was a positive, kind of a thing. So sort of like they brought me in to basically make the thing happen, and they kind of given me carte blanche on ideas like, well, what do you think we should be doing here, and how do we solve these problems?
Nice.
So the technology aspect was, and the kind of the opportunity aspect was pretty interesting. But another really important aspect was we were going from a team of very traditional, I don't want to say legacy, but very traditional network engineers, network engineers that are, been in the industry for a while, who have a way about doing things, which is not network automation. And the question is, well, could we create what I like to call the Iron Man suit experience, which is to say, can we create advanced technology, and surround a person with that advanced technology so that they can do what appears to be superhuman things, right? Like that is how I think about what we're trying to achieve. Some people think or used to think, well, if I do automation, we're going to lose people, or fire people, people are going to lose their jobs. If you're a push button monkey, pointing and clicking, doing, VLAN provisioning, and that's all you do, and you're not really, like, I don't want to say this negatively, but if you're not a real engineer, I hate to say that, but like if you're not if you're a network engineer and you just simply want better tools to do your job, then that's what I mean by the Iron Man experience.
Yeah. I mean, no, I was going to say, when I was working for a cloud provider, I think they were during the transition of time where they're trying to use software engineering mindsets and practices into a network engineering team. And one quote that stood out from just the head of that, that whole organization was, there's no Tor engineer, right? Like, there's no job description for people who just provision top of rack switch, because that is just something that's repeatable, something that you could just see the writing on the wall that's going to be automated and replaced pretty soon. So you have to either upskill, or you just have to dig deeper into and be at that top of pyramid of network engineering where you strictly do design docs, and you got to pick.
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow, like, this or that. I mean, what I was trying to say is like, if you're a network engineer and you've been a network engineer for like 10 or 15 years, you know what you do in your job, and you could say, well, there's some things in my job that is just toil. Like, it's just like, it's part of my job that I hate doing, but I have to do it, and then you look at that and you're like, well, if I had a better tool to do that job, so rather than it takes, 5 days to do it, it takes 30 minutes to do it, then I wouldn't be toiling away at that. I'd be working on the next stage of my project, which ultimately means that if I kind of follow that pattern, then maybe I can finish my projects faster or with a higher degree of service, is how I think of it. It's like, a business leader looks at that kind of problem at a macro level and goes, how can we go from, aha, I have an idea or a project that we need to do, to cha-ching, that is done, right? And so this is a phrase that I've borrowed from the DevOps world. They go, like, DevOps was all about going from aha to cha-ching, by reducing the amount of time, reducing the risk, reducing the human factor of opportunities for error, but ultimately improving the service delivery to a business. It was aha to cha-ching. And so when we talk about, like, tools that help us build out a new data center or build out a new office, that's the aha to cha-ching. So there's plenty of tools that kind of look at that problem set pretty well. But the real hard problem in networking, at least for automation, I don't think is the aha to cha-ching. I mean, that's important, don't get me wrong. But it's what I like to call the oh crap to all clear, which is, how can we go from, there's something that we think might be a problem with the network, to we have either identified that it isn't the network, or we've got, context sensitive insight into fixing the problem, right? Doesn't mean it automatically fixes the problem. This whole business about self-driving networks and AI and all that, I think is still very, buzzwordy and doesn't really mean too much. Sure. But the idea of it does make sense, which is again, I like to use the Iron Man suit. Tony Stark is still in the Iron Man suit. He just has all this really, high fidelity of context sensitive information, like, that's an enemy, we should shoot it. But right. Should we shoot it? That's what I mean by better technology. Yeah. And so going back to the kind of the grandpa story here is, like, if I start with a team where we've got smart network engineers, can we give them Iron Man suit technology and, evolve the operational excellence of our business? Right. And, over the last 3 years, we've been on that journey, and the answer is yes, they can be done. But it's a real investment, which is why, I think MLB wanted to hire, a software engineer into the networking team, was to, build these types of tools, make them reliable, so that a network engineer can trust that they work and feel good about it, because a lot of times the network engineering, kind of community has been burned by really crappy software products. I can name a few. We all can.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any sponsors, so feel free to name anything you want. But yeah, so if you're watching the YouTube channel, where I pull up this article that Jeremy you wrote back in 2019, it's kind of a good summarization or kind of your feeling, back then on why hire software engineer in such as yourself in a network engineering team. And did you want to dive a little bit deeper into that? And
Well, I mean,
yeah,
I'll summarize. I mean,
sure.
again, there's a very important distinction between two approaches towards quote network automation, right?
Yep.
And so I'll kind of use an analogy. I have friends of mine who are in the natural sciences, physicists and chemists, and they use tools to help them do their job,
Yeah.
right? So, and those tools could be a Python script to help them run some math calculation that's really, really hard, right?
Yeah.
And so they spend some time and they write a script and it does its thing. And if you put it in front of a quote software engineer, they would throw up all over it because it's not structured well, or its variable names are terrible, like whatever. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. It was a tool to get a job done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of network engineers who quote don't want to be software engineers or have no interest in it, they can get a lot of value out of that story. They can say, I'm going to use some tool like Python programming or whatever to help me do my job. I don't need to make perfect scripts. I don't need to, it's not going to be something that anybody else but me is going to use. It's sort of like I'm cooking food for myself to eat. So I don't care if it's chicken nuggets every day.
Right.
It's like, it's just for me. Nobody's gonna judge me.
Yeah.
My code isn't pretty.
It's not tested.
It's not tested. There's no test cases for it. You hear about all these millions of things that you do in software. And that's one thing. And I think that's a perfectly great place for a lot of network engineers to spend all of their time in quote network automation. If it helps them do their job and they're getting something out of that experience, and that's all they do with it, that is 100% awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Don't try to set yourself up to this higher bar of, I need to build some workflow pattern solution that integrates with ServiceNow and NetBox and 5 different network operating systems and make sure that it's bulletproof so that somebody else can click a button in a self-service portal and it works. Those are 2 very different jobs. One is a network engineer, appropriately competently using technology to help them do their job. And another is a software engineer building, business integration solutions that are specifically valuable to the business. Totally 2 different things. And that's the essence of what I'm really trying to capture in this article is that some businesses need somebody like, me that has the skill set. I happen to have a blend of software engineering and network domain knowledge, right? Which is pretty unique in that space. Not unique, but it's very specialized. I'll say it's specialized. Versus somebody who's a software engineer and specializes in, user interfaces, or a software engineer who specializes in databases. I just happen to be a software engineer that has domain expertise in the networking industry and automation. And I think what's going to happen, again, thanks to Cisco and DevNet, that maybe over the next 4 or 5 years, there's going to be hopefully more people, that with my background and skill set, that can really help move the ball. So going back to one of your original questions is, are you surprised that it's taking this long? No, because I honestly think the clock started when Cisco really got a chunk of momentum behind DevNet. That's when I think the clock really started. Up until that point,
2019 timeframe.
Yeah, it was 2018. I think I went to Cisco Live, I think in 2018, and I walked the DevNet show floor, and I'm like, okay, now they're serious. Now they're serious. They're serious.
Yeah. There's this little happening place at the corner where everybody hangs out.
Yeah. So if you can imagine that, in 2028, imagine the world of 2028. It may be kind of where we are now for distributed system software, like what we see in that world, like cloud software engineering and all the tools and technology and all the really cool things that they have right now.
Yeah.
I think our time horizon is 2028, or thereabouts. We're probably 5 years or more out out from like all the benefit that we see right now
Yeah.
for distributed system software.
Yeah. But I mean, just to wrap up your article and what you that I think that example you gave was perfect about your idea of what can software engineering bring to the network engineering world. So you gave the example. I'll just cover a big ticket item like mentoring, right? Like you were kind of showing these network engineers the maybe an alternative way of doing things. So you're mentoring them, you manage their expectations, so you don't need to boil the ocean. You could start with something that that helps you. You choosing the right approach. Back again at just using the script and so on, and look at other, teams, maybe systems engineering, just writing a bash script, and then collaborate with other teams. So I think those are really important expectations and kind of points that you drive home. So I mean, obviously, we'll put this in the show notes and people could read it. But I really enjoy reading that article as well. And that was actually one of my original question when preparing for this interview was kind of stem out from here. What can software engineering bring to a traditional networking team?
Yeah, yeah, no, I look back on this article and a lot has changed from the kind of the mechanisms. Like, we don't really use Ansible anymore. Like we've kind of evolved. Like I was telling you,
Yeah.
going from like cavemen to spacemen. The journey after I've been there for a little over 3 years, and it's been really incredible. It's been an incredible experience to really get your fingers in deep with complex problems that aren't just technology problems and such. But prior to MLB, I had always been on the vendor side. I'd been
Yeah.
in vendor land, and I talked about, oh, we should be doing these things, and here's how you could be doing these things. And, I wrote libraries when I was at Juniper, like I wrote PyEZ, to help kickstart, Python for Junos automation. And I did a few of those things, but they were really kind of baby steps, along the way. And then at MLB, this is really the first time I've been able to really invest,
Yeah.
Strategically, like how do we go from caveman to spaceman? What's a 3-year plan? What's a 2-year plan? What's a 5-year plan look like?
Yeah.
And then, kind of set expectations with upper management and then mentor people and, figure out that problem it's been really rewarding. I mean, there's some things that I didn't realize, I had aha moments. It was sort of like, oh, I didn't think that would be a thing. And like, wow, that really was a thing. And so that was pretty cool, because it is constantly a learning journey. Like, even for somebody like me, who's been doing this exclusively, I learn something, I try to learn something all the time about, whether it's the technology or just the business value, streaming process, and just all of that it's pretty cool. It is.
Yeah. I mean, it is. So I guess it's my fault for not mentioning this, but for people maybe outside of the US, MLB is Major League Baseball, and it's one of the top 2 professional league in the United States, and they're very, very profitable. And so that's back to what Jeremy was saying. He has the sky's the limit almost, right? Like there's no, but the budget's very high on something that were useful and good to the business. So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the technical challenges working at MLB? You mentioned one of them, which is saying no, right? Like you have all these opportunities to do stuff, both technically and budget-wise, but you have to say no in order to focus. So what are some of the technical challenges that you face at MLB?
Well, so I wouldn't categorize like, saying no as a technical challenge. I mean, that's more of a,
Sure.
that just, I mean, that's more of a like expectation project management thing.
Sure.
Technically, we run a very vendor diverse estate, a network estate, so, a lot of different network vendors, operating systems that, are legacy, all the way to, very modern things. So technically, there's 2 major technical problems I'll talk about. One is just dealing with just the differences in the network operating systems and the complexities that entails. If all you do is, for example, Arista EOS, right? And that's all you're ever going to do. Like, your problem statement around how do I handle network devices is very different than you've got 4 vendors and 27 operating systems. I'm not saying that's what we have, but I'm just, it's a different problem.
Sure.
So, so that's a technical challenge.
Yep.
But one of the biggest technical challenges that I work on is going back to infrastructure systems integration, which is as changes happen in our network and at a macro level, as we add or remove devices in and out of our network, how do we syndicate that change through all the various systems that we have that we use in order to operate our business? For example, we use NetBox to account for our network. So that kind of, we represent like, these are the devices and these are the interfaces and these are our circuits and these are how they're connected, like some amount of information about our network. But then we have tools that harvest information from our network on a daily basis. And we can like, well, did something change? And, how is that important? Or when we have to ensure that our IPAM system, which is not NetBox, has the full accounting of IP addresses that are being used by the network.
Right.
How do we make sure that our network access controller, is configured properly, that all the devices are in or out? Like, there's all these systems that operate our business, and syndicating and coordinating change like that, it turns out, is pretty hard. I mean, to do it well is pretty hard. Like, that's a technical challenge. And so every time we add a new vendor product, so we buy a new product, and now we have to make sure that that product has the inventory of our devices or whatever, whatever that is. So like, I talk about that as a syndication of data. Some people talk about that as diff sync. They mean the same thing. It's sort of like, when something in my network changes, how do I ensure that all of my systems that I use to operate and manage my business are in sync or have been syndicated?
Yeah.
That's a technical challenge, for sure.
So what are some of the solutions that you use for syndication? Is it just you collaborate between them by writing your own script, or is it just something that you think you could buy from a vendor? Because there are vendors out there who was willing to sell you a box that, one ring controls them all, right?
That is a very accurate statement. There are vendors out there who want to sell you stuff.
It wants your bucket of money. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So there's I like to phrase it like this. There's the right now answer.
Yeah.
And then there's what I consider the right answer. So, if you're somebody like me and you're trying to plan a strategy, that's always the case. There's always the right now answer. And that doesn't mean it's wrong or that it's absolutely technical debt, although sometimes it does mean that. Yeah. And then there's like the goal, the right answer, what we really want to achieve. Right.
Yeah.
And so, right now it is a lot of, bespoke Jeremy software, tooling. We build, software that integrates with the APIs of all these systems. And we have, a fancy, software solution that I focus a lot of time on.
Yeah.
But that's the right now answer. The right answer, as I believe it, is actually to try to use, and this is a product market term. It's called integration platform as a service, IPaaS. So you can like go to Gartner and look for IPaaS solutions, and there's a whole bunch of vendors in that market space. Now, as it relates to the networking space, if you try to take the intersection of IPaaS and networking, there's a couple of companies out there. Like iTential is a good example of this kind of company, sure. where they're like, we will sell you a product where you've got a drag and drop canvas that allows you to create automation workflows and click a button and do a thing. And I think that those products are still in their very early stages.
Yeah.
Meaning, they sound good and there are some things that they do pretty well, but there's this whole kind of problem space that I think that they're still working on getting better at. But in the non-networking space, there's companies out there like Workato and Trio and Collegio, and like there's a whole bunch of them. And they've been out there for a while. And their user experience is really great. Like their drag and drop is great, and their technology is really great, but they weren't built for networking. So if you want like an integration like with, NetBox, they're like, what's a NetBox? They are like, oh yeah, we integrate with Salesforce and, Marketo and, all of these, they were built for the SaaS cloud world.
Right, right.
I do think that ultimately those tools will evolve where we can get to what is called low code automation. Um, but even so, it still requires somebody who can think like a software programmer or deconstruct a complex set of steps into an approach that lets you drag and drop a solution. I mean, as a software engineer, we experimented with drag and drop coding platforms 20 years ago, right? And we
Yeah,
still artisanally write code now. So,
yeah,
I think there's a really great place for tools like that, and they're really good at certain things, and certain other things I think remains to be seen. That's what I am spending time in this area experimenting with this to
yeah.
try to see if we could do this well. And I think ask me again in a year, and I'll have better insights for you. But I do think that's the idea, because I don't think any organization wants bespoke software code. That was the real problem for sysadmins before tools like Puppet and Chef. Like, that was their argument. It's like, Bob has a bunch of bash scripts,
Yeah,
and one day Bob quits, and
right.
then you're screwed, right? Now it's company X has a whole bunch of Ansible playbooks that only Bob knows, and then Bob leaves, and so you have a bunch of Ansible playbooks. I'm not really sure how that problem's better or worse, but again, vendors try to sell you stuff all the time. So
Yeah, no, I think it's a hard problem, and I don't think anybody has an answer. But you brought up several good points about the intersection between something like a low code like the iTential and something more mature, maybe in other fields, and coming meeting of the minds. You also brought up the point about even though you don't write code, you still need people to organize them and know what they do. Just like what you said about Iron Man, right? Tony Stark still within that suit, but that suit just becomes Jarvis and artificial intelligence versus just like little monitoring beep that goes on the side. Um, and I think it is happening, right? If you talk to people, like we all have friends at Facebook or Google or what other these FANG companies that plenty of time they have another layer on top of the actual code, and just you write like declaration stuff like what you want to do, and then the lower level code could be Golang, could be Python, could be whatever, and that's what they focus on. So I think that is really happening. It's just not being democratized to, say, the enterprise world.
yeah, I think that's really fair. I mean, I do talk with folks, colleagues across the markets, whether they're in FANG or financials or,
Yeah,
all different types. I try to meet as many people that suffer the same challenges I have as much as I can, because everybody's got, no, I mean, everybody's got different insights,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
like, it's funny. It's like, we use Grafana to create really sophisticated dashboards. And I'm like, I just want to go to a conference and see other network engineers' dashboards. Like, what are you creating and what problems are you solving? Because,
Who has the most prettiest dashboard?
well, yeah, I mean, it isn't just about, who's the prettiest, dashboard in the room, but it's sort of like, show us really cool techniques that help solve, the problems that real network engineers have.
Right.
And that's just like a little microcosm of that. Like, so just like a little microcosm of that little problem. It's just kind of funny. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, like I said, I've been following you, and I think you made it in the industry once other people start to quote you, right? Like it's like you were recently at Network Field Day 28, and I know I think it was Netris, right? Like you were saying something like "best of show," I think, and they start tweeting out and say, "Hey, we got a stamp of approval from Jeremy, so congratulations! You're now the Cisco Eber of networking."
No, that is not my goal. But I mean, yeah, I try to help people where I can. And for Network Field Day, I had written a blog post. The backstory there. This is funny, and I wanted to share it.
Please do.
Yeah, the backstory here is I've done Network Field Day both as a vendor and as a delegate a couple of times, and
Yep.
I think some companies really, really struggle to present in that forum well. Like, some do an okay job, some do a tragically poor job. And as a delegate, I don't really want to watch a tragically poor presentation. So
you don't enjoy seeing 28 slides and people just talking in the background?
yeah, kind of. And so I wrote this blog, and I'm like, here's what I want to see a presenter. Here's how I'd like to see you present your stuff.
Sure.
And so the guys at Netris, they found a lot of value out of that, and they really kind of followed. I had this like kind of Mad Lib, kind of like setup, like kind of thing, and they followed it like almost to the letter. And I was like, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're trying to do positive reinforcement, right? This is what I want to see. So let's forget about what didn't work, and let's focus on what works, and let's reinforce those.
Yeah. So that was fun. Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I'm really very fortunate to meet a lot of colleagues, that are in the space that I'm in, and we share ideas and help each other out as much as we can. I'm very fortunate, and I appreciate that very much. Like the community of people who do what we do is small but growing. So
yeah, I agree to that. I mean, it's almost like a little, you mentioned Nanog, right? Like, so Nanog, it's almost you always show up and you're seeing the same people over and over again. And over time, even though you work for AT&T and you work for Sprint and whatever, but you start becoming, you identify more with that community than anything on the side of your shirt.
yeah, that's true. And forums like Nanog are excellent, like for this kind of a thing. I think I wish there was more opportunities like Nanog, that's specialized in automation, kind of topics, but maybe it's still too niche. I mean, as I live in a little bubble, right? Like every day for me is network automation, but my little world, it's my little bubble. So, I would love there to be a conference like that. One year, there was a conference where there was like a 2-day event that was specifically for network automation. And I thought that was a really good idea. So maybe that'll come back, once we're past, the sickness that's happening, the pandemic. Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, virtual conferences is I just can't do it. It's like, I just can't,
Yeah.
it's not the same. So.
Yeah, I see a lot of I think a lot of movements, and I think there's a bunch of built up energy in that regard. So I think once it's safe to do so, there will be, or I like you, I hope there will be some conferences where we could just get in a place where we just nerd out. I don't care if it's 20 degrees and outdoors, I still do it. Just hang out with other nerds such as myself. I think props to Network to Code and to all the open source projects they've sponsored or spun out or trying to gear toward. So I think we do need companies like that to kind of put dollars behind the movement.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but where the DevOps folks were very successful is that they were doing multi-city quote DevOps days. Like that was a thing. Like there was an organizer committee, I would presume, and you could go to devopsdays.com, I guess, and you can see exactly every city, what they were doing. They had a really great structure. It was like a 2-day event. I mean, whoever figured that out did a phenomenal job. Like they did a phenomenal job. And so in the early part of my career, like back in 2012, 2013, I just started going to DevOps days. Like it had nothing to do with networking. I just wanted to see, how did they run that conference? What were some of the topics? What were people interested in? And also for me personally, I was like, well, what kind of cool technology is out there that I might be able to adapt to networking? Like I don't want to say we adapted Puppet to networking, but we kind of did. I'm not saying it was terribly successful, but it was a good idea. Like it sparked a lot of thoughts, so. And that's not what we don't have that. We don't have a DevOps days equivalent for network automation. And again, maybe it's too niche, right now. I mean, if you think about the footprint of DevOps versus the footprint of networking, it is kind of orders of magnitude smaller. I mean,
right.
This was a really fun lesson I learned when doing complex sales deals. It's like when we're working on a really big project that was compute and storage and like all the things, like $100 million deal, and the network was like $7 million. And it's like,
right. It's
$7 million. Yeah, $7 million is still $7 million, but
exactly.
It's like comparatively speaking, it's pretty small. I mean, I wish we had something like DevOps days for networking. I think that would be great.
I think it would be it's triggering down, and we could almost like kind of piggyback into DevOps days, right? Like, so how we have these sprints after conferences and stuff. Then we could probably just say, maybe there's a 2-hour event after the DevOps days that would just focus on networking, and for people who want to show up for that. Once it gets to economies of scale, it will probably happen.
Yeah, I think where DevOps Days got really successful is that it was localized. Like
Yeah.
every city, had a DevOps day. Every I don't say every city, but major cities had DevOps days. So you didn't have to like travel to Vegas, every 6 months for this kind of event. It's sort of like, if you lived in Raleigh, there's probably going to be one. There was one in Raleigh, but there's one in Atlanta. There's one in Charlotte. Because there was enough DevOps-y people there where you had a body of gravity. This is Jeremy asking for a magic wand. I'd love to see that happen.
Jeremy, if you ask enough, you'll get a pony. No worries.
I don't know. No, that's fine. Yeah, no, but I think that really did help shape my point of view and how I kind of went after, how do we do network automation? I really owe a lot to a lot of the thought leaders I spoke to from the DevOps world. They really did help shape my strategies and thoughts around how do we approach this in networking. So
yeah,
I'm thankful. I'm very thankful for that.
Do you want to share what's the biggest, if you do recall, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you recall any kind of aha moment when you're attending maybe at the DevOps days and you say, oh, you know what, that's, agentless, that's the way to go, or, whatnot, that shaped your view for DevOps for networking?
No, I can't say like there was like any one kind of aha moment. I mean, the big aha moment came when, I learned like what Puppet was and was exposed to the whole idea of tools that did this job and did it, they would call it in a declarative way. Like, that was just a whole different mindset of how did they bring, and again, at the time they didn't use these words, but infrastructure as code, which is a word we kind of kick around all the time now, but 2012, DevOps wasn't even a word, let alone infrastructure as code. But the idea of how can we manage our infrastructure using the same principles as software engineering, like that was like a big aha. Because I was a software engineer, I could go, oh, I get this. Like I'd never thought about applying it to the management and operations of networking.
Yeah.
So that was this huge aha moment. And I think that's actually I think the whole concept of infrastructure as code is going to be a real challenge for a lot of organizations. Not necessarily because of the technology, like, Git is a thing, right? VS Code is a tool, but just, the mindset of what infrastructure as code means and how a network engineer would apply those principles is, I think, very, very much a paradigm shift from, how they manage their network today, right? And so that will be a real challenge. I don't know that I would call that a technical challenge. You're kind of going back to your earlier question, but I do think that is a kind of a skills process challenge. And in some cases, I don't even know that it's the right answer, for some organizations. I struggle with, I hear stories from some folks and they're like, yeah, we've been told we have to do infrastructure as code. And I'm like, okay, well, why is that? What are you trying to really get done? I mean, infrastructure as code is a way of doing a thing, which has a lot of benefits. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm a little biased, but I think it has an enormous amount of benefits. But the question is it really worth this? Is the juice worth the squeeze? I mean, because you're essentially going to have to reprogram people's brains to think differently about solving a problem and then implementing the solution to that problem. And maybe there is true benefit to the business to making that investment and working, on the transition. And then maybe there isn't, I mean, there isn't a one size fits all answer. I mean, I'm a big proponent of infrastructure as code. I love the idea. I can wax poetically about it for, a long time, but that in itself is a journey, kind of a thing. That's hard. That's really hard. It's actually much harder than people think about it. They're gonna think, oh, I'll just throw a CI/CD pipeline on it and that's infrastructure as code. I'm like, is it though?
Maybe.
I mean, yes, a CI/CD pipeline, is probably a very common element of doing infrastructure as code. Not required, but typical, but not required. Sure. I mean, like you get into all these really esoteric things, and it's challenging for network engineering teams, classically network engineering teams, to even have, to ask the right questions. I had this, I did this blog post a long time ago about eating ice cream. It was very famous, to the point where people were like, oh, the eating ice cream blog. And you can't find it on the internet anymore, sadly. But again, I mean, think of it from the point of view as a small child, being asked, what flavor of ice cream do you want with your birthday cake, having never had ice cream. Like, you don't even know what ice cream is. It's like,
Right. Right.
conceptually, you don't even know what questions to ask. It's
Yeah.
a lot of people are kind of in that boat. I mean, it's getting better, but
So do you think
still people
that's a
struggle with
part
that.
of the do you think that's part of the people challenge? So we talked about technical challenge, but also do you think it's the education aspect of it? Is it because people's mindset needs to change, or mentoring? Like, what do you think that's the biggest challenge when it comes to people? Because I think that's what we're getting into here a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the challenges with folks, people in general, is that there are people at different stages in their career. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
work with some young people, and they're very hungry to learn as much automation programming skills, in front of them, because they have their whole career in front of them, and they might not
right.
even like want to stay in networking. Like, they're doing networking now, they're getting exposed to software. Maybe they've got their eye on, being the next, AI ML developer. I don't know, but they're they're in their early parts of their career. And, when you're in your early parts of your career, you might not have the same obligations and responsibilities you have as somebody who's in the very late stage part of their career. And you have to be very
Very
respectful of
true.
that.
Yeah, very
It's like,
true.
you can't try to paint everybody in the same bucket. I work with some really smart people who are in the later stages of their career, and they are not going to spend their nights and weekends learning Python, and that's fine. That's okay. Like,
Yeah,
that's cool. It's like, if I build you a really cool tool and you like it, would you use it? And they're like, oh yeah, that'd be awesome. I personally am not going to write that tool, but you have to really understand the team that you're working with, and then, for each of the kinds of people that you're working with, you kind of have to figure out what's going to work with best for them. So I've got young folk on the team that, that want to do automation boot camps,
mhm.
or this surprised me. They want to watch me live code. Like, so, like, there's
Oh,
a
okay.
problem. So there's a problem that we want to solve. Like, all right, how do we, change something in the Meraki API across all of our networks, whatever. It's conceivably a small problem. It's like, change the pre-shared key across whatever. It's like, conceivably sounds like a really small problem.
Mhm.
And they'll want to watch me live code the solution, like, because they want to understand, like, well, why did you choose to structure your code this way? Why did you
Yeah,
use a list versus a dictionary versus a
right,
set? Like,
right.
why did you make 5 functions instead of 2 functions? Like, and I found that very engaging. Like, I actually really I enjoyed the experience of doing it. But I didn't really think like that was a thing I was going to do. Like, they asked me, they wanted to watch, and then they actually said, can you please record it so we can go back and watch it.
Yeah,
And so that's kind of how I think the maybe the younger generation likes to learn,
yeah.
which is different from the way I learn. Although I also like to watch people, videos. I get a lot out of that, so that's why I try to put out a lot of videos. You're kind of sharing my YouTube
Yeah,
channel there.
yeah.
I
You teach
love
it
doing these
helpfully
things.
too,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I was gonna say that you do share a lot of. I mean, obviously, for things that are proprietary, you can't, but you do share your screen, and I think you did it with John Capel as well one time, and you recorded that on how you guys kind of use VS Code to live share, and I think this was on AsyncIO, wasn't it? Or but anyways,
Yeah, we
it's
yeah we did
yeah.
an AsyncIO thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, check it out. I mean, I think I get a lot of value in that. I understand why people want to see live coding, just because if nothing else, I want to see where do they even start, right? Like, what's their process of breaking down a problem? Maybe a medium-sized problem, maybe a complex, whatever it is. How do they break it down into manageable pieces, and where do they pick to start? Because a lot of times nowadays with any kind of framework you use, you actually have to change multiple parts within, like, I don't know, model control view, right? Like, you got to change all three in order for it to work. But do you do the model first? Do you touch the database just because it's central brain? Or do you change something easy? You change the template, whatever it is. I like to see what people do. And you do some of that. So I do enjoy the pair programming and live coding.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I think gets lost along the way, though, and I've
Mm,
been kind of reflecting on this, is that back in my day when we were software engineers, and we used stencils because we didn't have Lucidchart or Visio. If you were trying to solve a problem, you would create a, what was called a flow chart, or other kinds of software engineering design documents, and there were many. Like, you just didn't do a flow chart. You had like an entity relationship diagram, and then you had like a ladder diagram.
Yeah.
And so what all of those documents do is they allow you to think through your design problem and then have them peer reviewed so that somebody can say, okay, I see what you're doing here, but did you consider this or this or this?
Right.
So if you're building, software, even if you're just building what might feel like a very simple tool, like that process still has to occur, like in some form or another. And what gets lost in these videos, unfortunately, not just my videos, but everybody you watch who does this, they're doing that step in their head, like all of it. Like there's this construct called the cathedral of your mind. Like in my mind, I can imagine all of these documents done, right? And that's something that, if you've done it for 20 years, that's something you can do. Like a basketball player can dribble a basketball. I cannot dribble a basketball. Right? I cannot shoot.
You could do the cathedral of your mind, though, right?
Yeah, but I can do like the cathedral of my mind, like so. Or I can kind of work it out in real time pretty fast. But that's only because I've been doing it for like, again, 20 plus years. But what's kind of lost in these videos, though, I think, is the fact that some people do the cathedral of their mind, and other people who are watching the videos just think that that's normal. Like that's like, why can't I do that? And we don't talk about this much, right? Because at the end of the day, people are trying to like rush to write some code. Like I want to write this code, or I want to drag and drop this workflow, or whatever it is they're trying to like get done. There's a lot of, I hate to say, software engineering design document stuff that normally typically happens. And nobody does that, like, because it's not sexy. It's not like, let me show you this design document that I wrote before I jump into writing this code for Django, right? No, they don't do that. Because it's not fun to watch. I mean, let's be honest, it isn't. But it is kind of critical in the process. And since we gloss over it and we don't talk about it, people just assume like they should be able to do that. And it's a skill that takes a lot of practice, just like anything. Like if you're a master chef, you know how to do things that it would take me a half hour to figure out how to do, like chiffonade something. Like, what does chiffonade mean? Like just anything. It's all like the domain expertise that takes time to develop. And I think people should not become frustrated or disillusioned or overwhelmed when they see somebody, like myself or other people do these videos and they feel like, gosh, why can't I do that? You're watching somebody who does that for a living, who's like, like imagine watching like those home improvement shows and they like remodel a house in 2 days.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, dude. It's like, I'm not going to remodel my house in 2 days or run a crew. I'm like, but they make it look so easy. Why don't I just run down to Home Depot and just remodel my house?
Exactly.
Like legitimately, I wish, now that I said that out loud, I really wish that leadership would kind of use that analogy in their head every single day. It's like, you're asking a network engineer who's a very smart network engineer to essentially remodel your house in 2 days. You're kind of asking them, can you build software that automatically upgrades all the software systems?
Because it looks so easy in the in-flight magazine, right?
That's right. Because the vendors make it look so easy. All you have to do is point and click with this one tool, and it's
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think some of it, we do need that, but that's part of the things I get from pair programming is I ask questions on, like you said, why did you pick a list? Why did you pick a set? And then you will explain it. And that is from your years of experience. And because you can already foresee, like maybe 10 steps down the line and where somebody who's just starting out cannot. And that's from just the interaction between the pair programming. So I agree. It's very important to have that thought process. And we need more of that just to get people comfortable and normalize the fact that it does take a long time to get to proficiency level or your expert level.
Yeah, that's true. And then the other thing that we do is we actually do pull request code reviews. So which is something, again, as a software engineer, that's what you do, right? Like you do not merge unless, on something that's real soft, like I don't want to say that, like something that's, that is meant to be, production grade business software, every change that we will make, gets code inspected. That doesn't mean that we have to have a meeting with 4 people and like prep for 3 hours. It just means like somebody else is going to put their eyes on it and ask questions perhaps.
Yeah.
Or even if there's nothing wrong with it, they're like, okay, can you explain what this is doing or why this is like this? Which, usually indicates I need to write more, comments in the code.
Right.
But just so people can see like what code looks like or what, your design style looks like, and if you're just getting started in a network infrastructure team and you have no one to do that with, I would imagine that's pretty terrifying, honestly. Like that would like that's sort of like saying, hey, Jeremy, we need you to cook a 5-course meal for, the New York Mets. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know how to like plan a menu. I don't even know like how to it just feels like overwhelming and terrifying.
Yeah.
And so,
and I think, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's kind of, again, why, you bring somebody like a software engineer into a network infrastructure team, or more broadly, just, somebody who does this kind of work across your infrastructure teams, because if you don't have that person, then how do you know what you're doing is good or bad or right or wrong? It's like, it's tough. It's it could be very scary.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that I have to learn coming from network engineering and always able to talk to other network engineers like over the cubicle was, and coming to like, Git and merge and peer review, was to not be offended. And I do see this sometimes within the network engineering world is, we're not, when you get a comment or when you get like a review, whatever, to explain more, don't be offended. It's just really just an extra layer of eyes, an extra pair of eyes for you to refine your idea, your communication, your approach. And they're not questioning your ability to design a network, or they're not questioning your ability to write some code. It's just to better to have this process is normal, and to normalize that process of just having feedbacks and collaborate as a team.
Yeah, so that's incredibly hard. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, like, again, but you're like, you should have this ability. What you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is like, you as an individual should not take things personally. Don't have a thick skin. Try to appreciate that people are trying to be genuinely constructive and not trying to be, assholes.
It's something that I have to learn. Yes.
Yeah. That's also a skill. Like, when I was a younger person, I was, not so chill as I am now. I'll just put it that way. So that's a personal growth thing. I will also say that depending on the medium of review, it can be really, really hard. Like, I've been in organizations where they don't do real-time peer reviews or code reviews. People just go into the code and they just leave comments, in the pull request. And, that's about as useful as Twitter, in my opinion, to try to like get a point across. Unless it's blatantly like a really kind of a blatant thing, for me personally, I really do not enjoy that kind of feedback response, because the English language is nuanced, and what they're trying to express may be nuanced, and trying to express the complexities of what they're trying to say is in English is nuanced. So I like doing live code reviews. That's how I like to do it. So we can talk through things and people aren't offended by somebody making a comment. And, and if you're going to be offended, that's a personal growth thing. Like maybe, you're young and you get offended a lot for whatever reason. It's like shit happens. That's really hard. And it isn't just the networking industry. There are software engineering firms, that are just toxic. They're just toxic. Like it's just terrible, and I'm like I'm not single. I'm a white male, and I have all the privilege in the world. Right. I do. Like, and I recognize that. And just think of like all the people who don't have that privilege. Like, I'm really lucky to work with at MLB. They really do care about, bringing in, minority and women and inclusion and diversity. It's not just a bullet point on the slide. It's like, it's really great to work with, the next generation of folks. And, it's a very inclusive and diverse group. And I'm trying to teach them good habits now. Like, how do you say no, collaboratively, so you don't feel like you're getting overwhelmed. And, how can you develop a conversational style to understand that I'm trying to help you and not be, an asshole when I'm, like,
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, it's a generational thing. It's like, it's really a tough nuance. And so this comes back to the whole infrastructure as code. Like, this is a whole thing that's all just like this, the whole peer reviewing, code reviewing is not something that you do in the traditional network engineering sense. You might like say, well, can you look at my Visio diagram? Right. And some people, they might say, can you look at my configs to look at them, which is kind of like code, so there's some kind of, I think, analogies that work, but I don't know how many, network engineers on a general practice say, I'm going to push this config change. Would you review it before I do? I mean, maybe that's very common in some organizations and not in others. I don't know.
Yeah.
So the idea of doing a code review or for infrastructure as code may be completely like in their wheelhouse, or completely like, well, why should I have somebody look at my stuff? Don't you trust me? Like,
right. Yeah, that's the people problem or mindset,
yeah.
or just kind of collaboration team.
And I think, like, if you were a manager of a network engineering team, like today, I think you've got one of the biggest hurdles in front of you. Like, trying to work with traditional network engineers and try to bring them through this kind of caveman to spaceman journey, and navigating all of these things that we're talking about that has nothing to do with technology, is incredibly complicated. It is incredibly hard to do. I was really, really fortunate to work with a really great manager who, worked us through this transition and was very supportive and adaptive and really awesome. I am, again, very fortunate and privileged to work with people like that. And I know from talking with a lot of my colleagues or other people, like, they don't have that. And it just becomes one more gigantic hurdle for them just to be successful. It's so terribly saddening to hear, like, I just want to get this done and I don't have the support of my management. And I'm like, oh, it makes me, a little piece of just dies.
a cat dies in the heaven when the manager rejects something like that. But
yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, no, I agree. And but I think it's the industry's changing, just like what we're talking about now. It's improving, and for people such as yourself who openly advocate for good behavior, who reinforce positive actions and improvements, then that will gradually change things. So, Jeremy, I really appreciate you being on the show today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think I learned a lot about how you approach things. I learned about your experience. So thank you for being on the show. Where can people find you on social? Where do you express your opinion about nowadays?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks again for having me. I love these conversations. Great questions. Hopefully my grandpa stories were not, terribly long.
No, they're great.
Yeah, you can find me mostly on Twitter, with my handle just shown there is Network Automaniac. That's probably the best place to find me. You can always hit me up and ping me. Every now and then I'll shoot a video and put it up on my YouTube site. I don't have a plan. Like, if there's something that people genuinely want to see, let me know. And, or if you've got a problem you want to work on and we shoot a video together, I think that's fun. But that's where you'll mostly find me. And every now and then I'll write a blog post, but I'm not like, I'm going to write a blog post every month, kind of a person. I've got so much else going on that I enjoy, mentoring, the folks that I work with and all. So, but you'll find me on Twitter mostly. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show again. I really enjoyed our conversation. Have a good one.
Yep, you too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Network Automation Nerds podcast. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other major podcast platforms. Until next time, bye-bye.